Hi, my name is Danielle Barreca with the Napa County Historical Society Board of Directors. Thank you for tuning in today. It is because of the support of members like you that we are able to still provide content during this challenging time. Please consider renewing your membership or gifting a membership to a friend or family member. Thank you, and we hope you tune in again.
Good evening, and welcome to the Napa County Historical Society's Author Series. Tonight is the first of a four-part series on an exhibit that's currently available at the Napa Goodman Library, the Historical Society, titled, Who Tells Our Story? Tonight, Todd Shulman is going to tell part of our story from the Napa Police Historical Society. Todd has worked in law enforcement his entire adult life. He began as a military police person in the U.S. Army, serving during the first Gulf War. Later, Todd became a police officer in California. He recently retired from the Napa Police Department. He held positions within the police department as a sergeant, detective, training officer, crime scene specialist, corporal, and cold case investigator. Todd formed a nonprofit, Napa Police Historical Society, in 2006 and continues today as its president. Besides his soon-to-be released book that you'll hear about this evening, Todd has written 3 other books, 2 about Napa County law enforcement history and 1 about Napa County historical postcards. The first book Todd wrote was Napa County Police. Then he wrote the Napa County Postcard Collection. His last book of the 4, the third book I shall say, is The Murder and Mayhem in Napa Valley. And his newly released book, which is actually available to purchase early now, is called Napa Valley Lawmen and Outlaws. Again, thank you for attending. Todd, we are thrilled to have you this evening to start off this author series and really look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much, Liz. It's an honor to be here, and I was very excited when the County Historical Society contacted me several months ago about participating in their exhibit that they are putting on at the Goodman. I want to thank Liz for that and Shelley for all her work, as well as Nikel, who's on the call here. I've had a chance to preview a little bit of it when it was being put together, and I think it's a great exhibit. And hopefully people will be able to see it either virtually or in person as situation with COVID takes place. But so I'm happy they asked me to speak about this new book that I am coming out with. It's actually going to be released officially in 3 days. And it's something that I worked on during the transition from getting ready to retire to being retired, and spent about a year working on it. So I'm going to go through a PowerPoint presentation about the book, kind of show you some background of it, talk a little bit about it, read from a chapter, hopefully, and then take questions as they come up at the end of the presentation. So thank you, everybody, for being here on the call. And I'll just share my screen here so we can get the PowerPoint started, hopefully. Okay, hopefully everybody can see my screen. Everybody good? Okay. So I might be looking off to the side here because my screen's next to my computer, but here you see the book itself, the cover of it. And the book is really, the title tells you what you're going to be looking at and what you're going to be reading. It's the stories of infamous criminals who committed crimes in Napa, and stories of dedicated public servants who worked in law enforcement the last almost 150 years, bringing those people to justice and keeping everybody in Napa County safe. And so that's kind of the backstory of what the book's about and how we got to the point of the book. I'll just go through the PowerPoint here so you can see the progression of it. Let's see, I think. Just one second. Okay, so hopefully everybody that's on the call has heard or has been to Jonesy's when it was around. It was definitely a one-of-a-kind place and a very Napa, old-time Napa restaurant out at the airport. And this book really started coming together in my mind about 14 years ago when I started doing research for my first book, the Napa County Police book. What I did was I was able to connect with some retired law enforcement officers in the county, and I found out that they had a monthly lunch at Jonesy's, and this was just a time to get together and as friends and talk about what I'll call war stories, some of their exploits as officers and in the different departments within the Valley. And they were nice enough to invite me into the group and to come along and join in these lunches. And so I got a chance to talk firsthand and get to know firsthand a lot of the people that are in this book from these lunches at Jonesy's. And so you can picture everybody chowing down on their famous potatoes and the steaks rolling out on the carts coming out for everything that goes along with a meal there. But some of the people that were instrumental and that I met there were people that you may recognize because they're old-time Napa names. People like Chuck Holden in the police department, people like Hal Snook, who worked at the sheriff's department, people like Ken Narlow, who was a detective at the sheriff's department, just a variety of these officers. And for me as a historian, it was interesting to hear the stories. And I found myself taking mental notes during these lunches, and then I would go home and try to research what I could in newspaper articles and looking up stories, trying to find more about what they told. So this is kind of the initial steps in my mind of this book, was getting to know these public servants, these men that had dedicated decades to keeping Napa County safe, and wanting to tell the stories of their lives and how they came into the career of law enforcement, and then some of the interesting criminals that they brought to justice. So this was the beginning of the book. The next part of it really was my work with the Police Historical Society. Liz mentioned that I founded this group in 2006, and during the last 14 years, we've been able to amass a pretty substantial collection of artifacts and photographs, both from different officers that have donated them, family members of people that have passed away. We've even found actually quite a few items on eBay, on the internet. You'd be surprised what you can find searching around. And so when I decided that I wanted to tell the stories of these lawmen that had protected Napa County, I looked to the collection of the Police Historical Society to find artifacts that might further tell the story. And so the way the book came together was each chapter of the book has a photograph of an artifact that belonged to one of these lawmen. So you'll have a baton or you'll have an item, and then that artifact is either from our collection or we've actually found several items from family members who let us take photographs of them. And then we tell the story of that person. So I thought it was important to bring a physical item to the forefront because it really brings to life the stories of who these people were. And as an example, I have some pictures I'll show you here. These are from the different chapters of the book. This is a pamphlet that dates from 1864. I'll maybe talk about this a little bit later if we have time. These are some handcuffs that date from just after the turn of the century. They were owned by one of our chiefs of police. This is a wooden baton that was carried by one of our officers in the 1920s. It was interesting to find out that most of these were handmade by the officers themselves. They didn't buy them anywhere. They just machined them with their own wood. This is a belt buckle that was from Chuck Holden, one of our former officers. He's now passed away. When he retired, he was given this badge, and it was his style to be kind of a country guy, wear boots and big belt buckles, and so he had his badge made into a belt buckle. that now is part of our collection. And of course, we have a few firearms. This one belonged to an officer that worked in the 1930s. His name was Ed Gloss. And this, if you can see in the picture, I don't know how well it shows up on the screen, but it has some intricate scroll work on it that's engraved. And that was actually engraved by an inmate at the county jail who happened to be a jeweler and did that as a favor for Officer Gloss. So each chapter of the book has an artifact like this at the beginning, and then we tell the story of the person that carried it in the book. And so I also just, each chapter we try to also bring other photographs from our collection to further bring to life who these people were. So let me just go back here and get to the next slide. Okay, let me go back one. So here we have, these are some of the photographs in the book. This is the earliest officer profile. He was a sheriff, Charles Allen. He served in the 1860s. This is Colonel Sanders. No, I'm just kidding. This is Nathaniel Boyd. He was one of our early chiefs of police. He owned those handcuffs that we showed you a minute ago. Here's Chuck Holden. He was a character, let me tell you. I not only got to meet Chuck and get to know him at these lunches, but I also spent some time at his house sharing a glass of whiskey with him. And you can see he's carrying there in this picture a pearl-handled revolver. And that's not standard issue, but it's something that tells you a little bit about who Chuck was. Here you've got Richard Lonergan, Dick Lonergan, who was many years at the Sheriff's Department. Some people know him as Mr. Napa because of his long history with Napa High School and other pursuits throughout the city. He was among other things, though, he was a great detective, and he worked on a lot of the homicides that are featured in this book. And this is a picture of Melvin Critchley. He was one of the early CHP officers in Napa, and he went on to have a long career in the CHP. In fact, his badge was badge number 1. It was retired when he retired in the 1960s. And they actually had to change the retirement laws for the state because he had served, I think, over 40 years in the CHP. But he's a great character, did a lot of early work with traffic enforcement. So each chapter has these photographs as well to talk about who these people were. I talk a little bit about why they became cops, the backstory of their family, how they came to the Valley. Many of these people came from other places and were drawn to Napa because of a lot of the things that we all are drawn to the Valley for, the beauty of it, the peacefulness, the friendliness of the people in the Valley. And so I talk about the stories of how these people made it to Napa, and then a little bit about their family, growing up in Napa with their families. And then again, as I said, some of the stories about infamous cases they worked on. And so that's kind of the format of the book. There are a couple chapters in the back that are slightly different. I do have one chapter that just talks about our dispatch center because it is such an important part of what we do in law enforcement. We couldn't do our job without having people at the other end of the radio to back us up and give us information. And they're the ones that take these 911 phone calls that are very difficult to deal with. And so I have a whole chapter about how the dispatch center has progressed over the years. As well, there's a chapter in here about the SWAT team, which is an interesting set of characters, so to speak, and they have interesting histories. And then I also have a chapter about our infamous football team, which was in the 1980s. It was a full contact football team that played charity games against firefighters and other people. Liz's father was on that football team. She maybe has some memories about it. But unfortunately, it had to end because too many people got hurt on the gridiron, and then they couldn't do their job. So, but there's some fun stories in here about the football team. So that's kind of the format of the book. I wanted to just go over one chapter with you to kind of give you an example of how it is, how it's set up. This is a chapter about Hal Snook. Again, Hal was a cornerstone of the early sheriff's department in the 50s and 60s. And he was the person that basically created their crime scene unit from scratch. So he did all the training on his own. He built the unit up, and the chapter starts with the photograph in the middle, which is a picture of his badge and a picture of his signature, one of his signature pipes. Hal was known to always have a pipe in his mouth, and that's evidenced by the picture you see on the right. That's him with another one of his pipes, working on getting a photograph out of a book. So these were artifacts that the family shared with us to explain this is who Hal was. And I got the chance to meet Hal as part of those lunches at Jonesy's, and got a chance to see him unfortunately at the end of his life, but great character, very small person, very diminutive, but a powerful force in the sheriff's department. And the story of his, the story of his career at the sheriff's department could cover a lot of infamous cases. He worked, of course, in the Zodiac case, which everybody knows about. But when he was interviewed, when he was getting ready to retire, they asked, the Napa Register asked him what case he was most proud of. And he said the case of Walter Williams. And this was a murder case that happened in 1971. And you can see Mr. Williams on the left side photograph. He's in the center there, holding a book, which is a Bible. So this story came on the heels of the Zodiac cases. You remember the Zodiac cases happened in 1969, 1970 timeframe, where the attack in Lake Berryessa occurred. And in 1971, another PUC student named Linda Keynes wound up missing. And it was very unlike her to not show up for school and not check in at her dorm. And it led to a lot of speculation that maybe the Zodiac was back, because the first attack at Lake Berryessa included 2 PUC students. So it was a huge manhunt, or not manhunt, a huge search operation looking for her, trying to find her. Her vehicle was located on the side of the road, abandoned on Howell Mountain Road. And unfortunately, her body was later discovered 2 weeks later. And the sheriff's department looked at a bunch of different suspects in this case. Nobody that she directly was connected with could be ruled in as a suspect. But they started looking at Walter Williams because he had a history of some prior sexual offenses, and he lived on Howell Mountain Road. And he was known to talk to PUC students when they were driving or walking up the road to go to school. So Walter Williams was known to everybody as Willie. His actual nickname was Willie the Woodcutter. And that's what he did. He was a woodcutter as his profession. He went around cutting wood from people's property, selling it as firewood. And I first became aware of this case actually not from the lunch, but from talking to a retired judge, Phil Champlin. Some of you may know Phil. He's very big into history as well. He's a local fixture in town. And I was talking to Phil at his house and asking about cases he worked on as a judge and as a defense attorney. And he mentioned this case as also being a case that really struck him. He was the defense attorney that worked with Walter Williams on this case. And so from the story that Hal told the newspaper back when he retired about this case, and listening to Judge Champlin, I dug into the case, looked at newspaper articles. I was actually able to find this photograph you see of Mr. Williams on eBay, believe it or not. It was a press photograph that was being sold on there. So I'm just going to read a little bit from the book about this case. It's a textbook case of forensics and how they play into cases. We all know about DNA today and the importance of CSI. You know, you see it on TV, but people like Hal Snook were doing forensics in the pioneering days, and they didn't, of course, know about DNA or have any inkling of what we would be able to do today with a drop of blood or a minuscule fiber. But What they did the best they could. In this case, they did a really great job. And Hal worked with a guy named Peter Barnett, who was a private forensics specialist that they brought in. And I'll just read from what they did and how it connected Mr. Williams to the crime. So red fibers from the flag found with Linda matched red fibers located just outside the front door of Walter's house. The duffel bag that held Linda's body contained paint chips that matched paint chips located in the laundry room of Walter's house. A few minute hair fragments located on Linda's body were consistent with Walter's pubic hair samples collected by Hal and Peter. After a lengthy trial, Walter was convicted of first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison, and he later died in prison. So this was a case that if Hal and the people who worked with him hadn't done their work properly, it never would have been solved. It would have been another one of these unsolved crimes that is a cold case in Napa. But it just shows the attention detail that Hal showed in his career, and it's one example in the book. All the different chapters in the book involve infamous murders. Another one I'll just mention real quickly is I talked briefly at the beginning of my presentation about Charles Allen, the sheriff that served in 1864. And one of the artifacts that we have that we also found online is a little booklet, and I'll show a picture of it here. So don't be upset that I'm not wearing gloves on this one, but this is a booklet that is from 1864. So the booklet itself is over 160 years old. And this booklet contains the jailhouse confession of a guy named James Gilbert. That's his picture on the front of the booklet. And he was somebody that Sheriff Allen tracked down. He had killed a neighbor. It was kind of a lover's triangle situation. And while Jenkins was in jail, the sheriff talked to him at length, and Jenkins decided he wanted to give his jailhouse confession to the sheriff. So the sheriff sat with Jenkins for many days and put together this pamphlet based on what Jenkins told him about his life of crime and the dozen or so people he killed. And then the sheriff sold these for 25 cents a piece to people. So it was a little different time. I don't know if that would really fly today, but it was something that they did back then. And I'll just read one little sentence from the foreword for this book. So this is at the beginning of the book. And it's kind of a warning that the sheriff puts in here. And he says, "The boys, especially of this coast, will do well to heed the warnings and have nothing to do with horse racing, gambling, whiskey drinking, or keeping bad company. For these will, as he said, and every man of sound sense will sanction it, lead to crime, and it may be to the gallows." And so that was the sheriff's warning in the beginning of the book. And of course, it did hold true for Mr. Jenkins, because he was hanged at San Quentin Prison for his crime. So that's just an interesting artifact and kind of shows you some of the book. I know we're running a little bit short on time, so I'd be glad to take some questions if people have questions they'd like to ask.
Yeah, thank you, Todd. We have a few questions from the audience.
I'm gonna turn off my screen here real quick.
Sure. Yeah, it's good. Speaker view to see your face.
Yes. Okay.
There we are. Well, the first question is a very serious question. Would you ever get a house nook style pipe?
Whatever. I'm sorry. What?
Would you ever get a house nook style pipe?
Oh, well, I've never smoked, so I don't know. That would be a hard one. And I do like the smell of pipe smoke, so the concept is good. But maybe I could get one that has like fake smoke that comes out of it. Maybe like a faux pipe.
All right, and then since you've recently retired, what is up for you next?
Well, I actually was only retired for 2 months, and I'm actually back working part-time at the police department. they couldn't keep me away, I guess. Seriously, I spent 20 years at the Napa Police, and it's a great place to work, and there's a great group of people there. But I am working part-time for them, helping out with their policy manual. There's a lot that goes into keeping up to date on the regulations and how we do our job. And I want to say our policy manual is probably like 800 pages right now. It keeps getting bigger every year. It's funny because the historic artifacts we have in our collection, I have a policy manual from the 1970s, and it's maybe 20 pages long. It's a little different time now. So I'm doing that part-time, and enjoying having more time in retirement to do projects around the house.
Yeah, what a time to be working on police policy with all of the social anti-racism and police brutality conversations going on. I'm glad you're able to be a part of that.
Yeah, I will say the Napa Police Department's been on the forefront of community relations and working with the community to have a good, a good understanding of what we do and how we do it, and get feedback from the community. I know the chief has actually started a citizen advisory council, and so these are all great steps to make sure that we're keeping in step with what the community expects from law enforcement, and help the community understand what we do in our job.
Yeah. All right, our next question is about, are most of the more recent men you write about still alive?
Well, unfortunately, I wish I could say more people in the book are alive. The people I mentioned at Jonesy's that I had lunch with, people like Ken Jennings and Chuck Holden and all these great former law officers, unfortunately, those people have all passed away. The people that are still alive that are mentioned in the book are people like the football team, which is mentioned prominently in the book, as well as people that work in our dispatch center and some of our SWAT team members who are pictured in the book. So, law enforcement is a tough career, and it takes a lot out of people physically. And unfortunately, the life expectancy of someone in public safety is not as high as the general public. But I thought it was important to tell the stories of these people so that they could be remembered.
And it sounds like you're still working part-time, like you said, but do you still consult on cold cases, or are you completely retired?
I'm retired from that as of now. There are some interesting opportunities in some other jurisdictions. I'm actually currently, we moved up when I retired, we moved up to El Dorado County, and they have a cold case unit here that's retired cops that work for the DA that work on cold cases in this county. So that's something I'm looking into. And all the cases we worked on when I was a cold case investigator there at the police department, when that unit was disbanded, all of those reports and cases were digitized and put on the computer, so that when new detectives come forward, the next generation of people, they'll be able to pick up where we left off and hopefully make progress on some of those.
Yeah, I love hearing that. And what is, here we go. What is a cold case you wish you could solve in Napa, or I assume abroad?
Of course, the first answer would be the Zodiac case, because that's such a famous case. And if I wrote a book about it, I would be very rich, probably. But no, the case that really sticks with me beyond the Zodiac case, I would say, there's a couple cases that come to mind. I would say probably that case is the biggest one. There are a couple other ones that are hanging out there that I really probably shouldn't talk about because they're still suspects in them. But there was a case that happened in 1980 that involved a man that was killed in his house near Napa High School. And we believe we know who did it. We believe it's the same person that killed 3 other people, and is currently in prison. But it's a case that I wish we could close for the family's well-being. but we just haven't got the physical evidence to put that together to make it to trial. So that's a tough one.
Mm-hmm. And given your career, what motivated you to chronicle the traditions and practices of peace officers?
Well, I've always been an amateur historian, I think, at heart. You know, even growing up as a little kid, I loved history, going places and looking at old sites and things like that. And so, you know, getting into law enforcement 25 years ago, you know, I saw it as a profession that is giving back to the public and serving the public. And as I said in the beginning when we talked about these people that are in the book, you know, these people dedicated their lives to protecting people in this, and a lot of times they didn't get any recognition for what they did. You know, they're kind of the unsung heroes because they brought people, you know, they brought people to justice, they closed cases, they brought people, I'm sure the families that were directly involved, you know, consider these people heroes, but they, every day they would go in and, you know, put the uniform on and do the job. And so I think it's important to realize that, especially today with what's going on in the narrative in the world, and it's important to humanize who police are and realize that we're, you know, citizens, we're people in the community, and what sacrifices they made in their careers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. That's that leads to our final question. It seems like a lot of people are enjoying the participation so far. Well, we have another question that came in, but what is your next book idea?
Well, that's a good question. Yeah, it was a lot of work putting this together and tracking down family members of people and doing the research. So it's very labor intensive. I'd like to try my hand at a fiction book. You know, all my books have been nonfiction and directly related to the history, but I'd like to maybe look at some of the experiences that I had myself as a cop and maybe fictionalize those, change some names to protect people's privacy, and maybe put some of those stories on paper. Because I've dealt with some interesting things over the years that I think would translate into maybe a fictionalized version.
Yeah, how interesting. Okay, so this one might be our final question. How is this book, Lawmen and Outlaws, different than Murder and Mayhem? That's a great question. The second part of this is, can you give us a brief description of Murder and Mayhem?
Yeah, so Murder and Mayhem was a book that told the stories of infamous murders and crimes that occurred in Napa. And so it was a story focused completely on, or almost completely on, the criminal and the crime they committed and the trial afterward. And so it was compelling because these are some very big high-profile cases like the Zodiac and other cases that were in the book. But this book differs, as I said, because I wanted to focus on the people that brought those criminals to justice more and tell their life story, and also bring out some of our artifacts that we've been collecting to highlight, you know, those people and what they would have used in their job, the tools of the trade, so to speak, what they did as law enforcement officers. And then a description of, so that's the difference. Hopefully I answered both questions there.
Yeah, I think you did. And I'll open it up if anyone has another question. Write it quickly now in the chat before we give the mic to Liz. But yeah, we're getting a lot of people are interested and ready for this book. I know we have some pre-orders already. So.
Yeah, I will say that I plan on coming into town and doing some autographs on these books, hopefully in the near future, maybe the next, when they arrive. I don't think they've actually arrived yet. That way they'll be valuable someday when I'm famous. And the book is also, of course, available on Amazon, but I recommend going through the County Historical Society or contacting me directly if you prefer I have books as well. Because the proceeds that go from the books at the County Historical Society help support what they do, and rather than give Amazon money.
Thank you, Todd. Thank you very much. Todd, I have a quick question. Do you work with other police historical societies in California or outside the state?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. There's actually a network of police museums and historical societies that has been pretty active the last 10 years in North America especially. And we actually hold conferences every other year where police historians get together and talk about best practices for preserving these artifacts and how to display them to tell a compelling story. And so I've been honored to be able to meet some police historians in other cities like LA and New York, and even a few from Canada. And so yeah, it's kind of a unique field because of the artifacts we deal with, and so it is something that I've enjoyed learning from other people about. Yes.
And on a personal note, regarding my dad, because he was a local historian, Lee Hart, did you and he also talk? I mean, because I know, I remember Officer Holden, and of course, Dick and some of these other gentlemen that you've mentioned already. The two of you discuss some of the, police history?
Yeah, I did have some conversations with your dad before he passed away, and of course, I knew him actually on the job. He was still working when I first started 20 years ago. And so he was a great lover of history, like you said, especially Yountville and that area. But yeah, we had some discussions about the police department, and he was somebody else that told me some of these war stories that I've been keeping track of in my mind.
Yeah. Well, thank you again. I can't wait to read this book. All your books are wonderful. I know we have Murder and Mayhem inside the Goodman for people to purchase. Nikhil, do we have the other two books in supply? Do we know if those are available through the Goodman, or how can folks purchase?
Yeah, we have the police book. The postcard book is in the library, so anyone can come in. It's a non-circulating library, and come in and read the book. And then if you pre-order Lawmen and Outlaws, we'll have that ready for you when it gets shipped to us, and most likely up on retail downstairs as well.
Perfect. And Todd, I know you said you would sign some of these books for folks, which is great. So we appreciate that. And again, thank you so much. I mean, this means a lot to all of us. And thank you for the service that you gave, to the city of Napa and keeping that history alive. It's precious history, and we don't want it to be lost. So thank you for being a guardian of that history.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. This is part of a series called Who Tells Our Story? And I opened up tonight. I didn't introduce myself or introduce our research librarian, Nikhil Riggs. I'm Liz Alessio, formerly known as Liz Hart. And we also have, our Vice President Board of Director, Dr. Shelley O. Smith, who was a great part of this new exhibit that's absolutely stunning. We have our guest curator, Dr. Monica Hunter, who's here. And Monica, I'm going to put you on the spot since we have you, and just have you give an overview just of what people can look forward to as they can now re-enter the Goodman after being closed for 6 months with this beautiful exhibit. Oh, you're on mute. I'm sorry, Monica.
Thank you, Liz, and I appreciate a few moments, really. So the exhibit is really fashioned to look at the Valley from 1830 to 1930, and we really look at the families and the way in which the families built their enterprises, their businesses, in sustaining themselves. Most of the early settlers were ranchers and farmers, and slowly it built out into vineyards and leather and tanning industry, and mining, of course, that was going on. And we look at the way in which the tourism and the resort uh, area built up around the hot springs. And then we take a look at what happened when California became a state in 1850, and Napa Valley and the county was established as one of the early early counties, one of the first 27 counties established on statehood. And so there's so much there to tell about the Valley. I think when we think about, local history, we often concentrate on, the founding fathers and the way in which different parts of the Valley developed. But we always want to remember that California itself was a place on the planet that many people wanted to be. They wanted to come to California. It wasn't just about the gold rush. It wasn't just about the way in which California presented opportunities for people to come and start a new life. So we hope that this story is told fully, and we thank the authors, many of whom were published through Arcadia Publishing, including Todd's work, and recognize that we have many local historians that have told stories about the Napa Valley, and in looking at how they have portrayed the Valley and the different aspects of the Valley that they have highlighted, we're hoping that the Historical Society will be a place where others will come forward and help tell their stories. And that's what this exhibit is meant to inspire. So I'll leave it with that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hunter. And the feedback we've received has been tremendous for folks who've been coming in. There was a front page, it was actually 2 pages, front page and a second page review and article in the Napa Register on who tells our story. The timeline when you walk into the Goodman in the foyer has garnered a lot of praise also. And then the exquisite images that you and Dr. Smith and Nicole and Kelly, our intern, went through so many images to be able to select these 100+ beautiful just representation of our history. And then the artifacts that we have, the objects and the items, including some of the items from the Napa Police Historical Society. And Todd, thank you again for entrusting those with us so people can come in and see those items. There's a story for every single one, for every image and for every item. There's a special story there. And it's about the stories that have been told and also the stories yet to be told. The voices we've heard and those that we were waiting to hear. And I do want to say, Todd, if I can, real quick, if somebody has a story for you or has an artifact that you might be interested in, how can they reach you?
Oh, thanks. Thank you for the question. We have a website, which is napapolicehistory.com. And you can go to that website and it'll have a link to our email address. Our physical address is on there, as well as the contact phone number. So it's napapolicehistory.com is the website. And we definitely are interested in any types of artifacts or photographs or stories related to any, particularly the Napa Police Department, but really I've been keeping track of a lot of things in Napa law enforcement. So even if it's a CHP story or a story about a sheriff, we'd love to hear it and catalog and keep track of it. So thank you, Liz.
Thank you. Thank you. And I need to thank the sponsors who made this exhibit possible. So I want to thank Arcadia Press. I want to thank the Doctor's Company, Aegis Living Napa, and the Congregation of Beth Shalom. And speaking of the Congregation of Beth Shalom, our next author is Donald Mendelson. And this will be on Saturday, November 7th at 7 o'clock. It's going to be on the book that she co-wrote with Michael Mikowski called Napa Valley Jewish Heritage. So if you haven't already, please save the date, RSVP, and we look forward to that. Also, if you have to look at our other programs that we have available, and we have educational curriculum for students of all ages. We have incredible links that Dr. Shelley O. Smith and Dr. Hunter have worked on to bring to us. Please go to napahistory.org. And I thank you. I want to end this evening with one of our board of directors, and that's Danielle Barreca. She has a short message for you. In the meantime, we hope you stay well. We hope you stay in touch, and we hope to see you in person with your face cover inside the Goodman.
Thank you for tuning in today. We hope you enjoyed the programming. Remember, you can social distance while still getting closer to local history.